You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Christopher Media, let's make some noise.
Hey folks, it's Mike White. Welcome to a special episode of the Projection Booth. A few weeks ago we talked about the movie Wolfen, and I mentioned that there is a documentary in the works about Wolfen called Uncovering Wolfen. Well, I am back this week with an interview with the director, producer, editor, man about town, Mr. Stu Buck, to talk about that film, as well as another documentary that he's working on all about Michael Mann's The Keep. I initially asked Stu how he got interested in both of these films.
It really started for me around kind of my final years of university, around 2003, 2004, where I studied film in West Sussex. This is about 50 miles away from London. Parallel to that, I'd also started running for a production company at that time. While I was studying at university, one interesting thing that occurred to me in that there were very split camps in the study of film. Those that were commercially minded and those that were leaning towards the art house. There didn't seem to be a real sort of discipline for both forms. Most of the Hollywood filmmakers in the 80s and 90s, they'd seen kind of Fellini's 8.5 and all the great movies of the New Wave, the world cinema. You only need to look at John McTiernan, and to learn from his audio commentaries for films like Die Hard and Predator. He was very much influenced by all the world cinema of the 70s and 80s. I appreciated both forms. I was that kind of rare egg. If it was well-intentioned and it was well-made, I loved all forms of cinema. And this was back when you would literally watch everything in the VHS and the DVD eras. Now it's less so. That was a pretty significant point that stayed with me, and we'll sort of get into Wolfen later.
When you were at university, were you making a lot of films as well as studying them?
Yes, I was indeed. Yeah, the last year gave us a real opportunity to direct our first short film. So that was a good kind of learning exercise. I learned a lot from that. I directed child actors. They say you should never work with children and animals, but I worked with one of them, and I had no problems at all. And I learned a lot about the craft of filmmaking, and that was really kind of a springboard for me. That really kind of bled in to running for a lot of these film companies back in the day. So that kind of segues into being exposed to a lot of different aspects of the business while I was studying. I remember Peter Briggs's version of Alien vs. Predator. That sold for quite a lot in Hollywood at the time, and providing script reports and so forth. Being exposed to budgets. These are budgets. They're pretty modest budgets, but at that time it was between maybe films between 1 and 25 million. The Merchant of Venice was probably one of the biggest films that they did at the time. Michael Radford's version, The Secret of Moonacre. But what they seriously lacked was distribution with these titles.
So what happens when you get out of university?
That was the question. That's the question you ask yourself. What are you going to do next? Because I had no background, sort of film, sort of family background. I wasn't a privileged child in any way. So I really had to find a way in myself after building up all these network of contacts in the industry. So I started with people that I had known and had met previously, and one of them was a guy named Peter James, producer who has now become a very successful writer, but he had been working with the companies that I'd been running for at the time. And he, for kind of genre fans in particular, Peter Jones is most known for his work he did in the 70s with Canadian tax shelter movies, with Quadrant Films, Bob Clark's Death Dream was one, and also The Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. So I wrote a sort of proposal for a documentary on him. I mean, it was never made. He was pitching his own TV series at the time, which was also never made. But that was a good kind of germ of an idea of how to work my way into the documentary form. And it was those kind of contacts that then gave me a sense of wanting to pursue the documentary, a specific subject. And that's obviously when I became very interested in Michael Mann's body of work, and one personal favourite film being Wolfen.
Which comes first, your interest in The Keep or Wolfen as far as these documentary projects you've been working on?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, I saw probably both films on VHS at the time, and they struck me as very well-made pieces of cinema. I mean, I wasn't sort of young enough to see them on the big screen. Obviously, the lore of the obscure mystery of these films, the fact that they were done in a kind of studio environment, but they had a very kind of unusual mix of an experimental and a documentary film wrapped up inside. And that's those two kind of things kind of gelled together for me, and what interested me most about it. And that obviously comes back to the things that I'd learnt in film school about my class not really respecting the discipline of both forms.
So when do you say, this is it, this is what I want to work on? Did you happen to start to dig into these movies first and see the unusual production histories, or were you just like, I want to learn more about this and I'm going to use a documentary form to do that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of, we're talking 2004, 2005, so it was very kind of early stages of the internet where you would gather a lot of facts at this time. I think it was 2007, I tried my hand again at a couple of short films, and that really wasn't working for me in terms of financing. So the documentaries grew organically. I think I started with Michael Wadley first as a kind of through line. I went to see him. He now lives here in South Wales. He lives up here with his veterinarian wife. I mean, he's still a hippie to this day. He still remembers the history of Wolfen very sharply. And he gave a fascinating, probably 2 to 3 hour interview that really kind of set me on my way in terms of putting together the pieces to tell this story. Because I wasn't just interested in the retrospective side of it. I was interested in the social causes that he still fights for.
Yeah, he's a very fascinating guy. Was it easy to get in touch with him for you, or did it take a lot of cajoling?
It did take some time. Obviously, me being, probably about 60, 70 miles away from Wales, I think he was willing to give the commitment to sort of sit down with me and give me the time that I needed. But yeah, I mean, I think at that time he was pretty much exhausted of talking about Woodstock. And the documentary, although it will touch on that history, it won't really kind of talk about that in more depth. It's really solely about Wolfen, its themes, and what he intended to do with the film.
So do you go to him with the idea this is going to be a documentary, or do you say we're going to sit down and talk about this and we'll see what happens with the footage?
Very much the latter as opposed to the former. I wasn't quite sure. The same with Keep, in many ways. I wasn't 100% sure where this would go or whether it would go anywhere. But it both of them really kind of grew quite organically in the end, and so I decided to continue, and here we are, sort of 10 years later, with all these pieces that we've gathered together, many interviews, and a real understanding of New York culture at that particular time, that particular era, the 70s and 80s, and just what kind of Michael really wanted to do with the film, which we can both understand now in script form, and what eventually ended up being in the movie.
Tell me a little bit more about the timeline as far as you getting these interviews, finding out information, and then I imagine you've got to be working a day job at the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's I've managed to find something that is very sympathetic with the ambition of doing this, or trying to do this for a living. And it allows me the time to go away and edit and produce these things, and really do a little bit of travelling to understand these different cultures. We spent probably at least 3 or 4 years gathering interviews for Keep, for example, in Europe, in the US, all over. And that really comes down to my deep, intensive research that I do on these documentaries. I mean, it really goes above and beyond your standard commissioned based piece, which could never be done in-house.
I'm just trying to imagine what it's like to balance working on 2 pretty major documentaries about these films from the 70s and 80s at the same time, because it just seems like such a workload for one movie, much less 2.
Absolutely, yeah, and I've also got short films and features in development as well. But these are obviously the main focus for now. They need to be finished, and hopefully next year will be the year where we can finally put them out there. But yeah, I mean, we have a lot of hurdles along the way, like a lot of these independent filmmakers have, like licensing material and getting the right pieces to tell the story, really. With Wolfen, it's a little bit different. I mean, it was a closed set, so I knew for example that there wasn't going to be any sort of moving image behind the scenes. So this was going to be very much focused on introducing what Wadley had done before Wolfen as a kind of pre-credits sequence into 1979. We're talking a timeline sort of a decade later, so to speak, into the development of Wolfen and the themes he chose. So we're looking at a very broad set of different themes, such as Native American Indians, the surveillance kind of design of the piece, which we'll get into when we interview Paul Silbert. That was the first thing, and that was the masterstroke of the film, was having the very top of society and the very bottom of society, and that was quite key to developing the film.
It sounds like you already have quite a structure set up in place, but I'm curious how that came to be and what were some of the biggest challenges making this for you?
With Wolfen in particular, I mean, there are lots of people who were very forthcoming to talk about this film, some on camera, some gave audio interviews. But I think, again, talking about that split camp idea, there is very divisive teams of people on the film. I mean, Wadley to this day never said he had the real drive to pursue this as an ambition. I mean, it was just something that he wanted to come to Hollywood. He wanted to send messages. We have fragments of that left in the movie, which remains fascinating. What I'm trying to do is really kind of structure it in such a way where I'm trying to give this message that there is something very prescient about this film in particular, and obviously the nature of terrorism.
Where are you getting the budget in order to... Are you flying over to the U.S. to get these interviews, or are you doing them all from the UK?
There is a little bit of, I should say, networking in terms of people we reach out to in the US. I have been over there. I mean, we're very lucky to have a lot of the cameramen who work on a lot of these independent projects and also for the DVD and Blu-ray interviews. They've been very helpful and open to, really kind of helping me sort of segue into, trying to make this a reality. I mean, it's hard to do it from here. I mean, there are one or two people here for Wolfen, but I had to be in New York. I mean, that's really where it started. And of course, Los Angeles is where a lot of the crew have now since kind of retired to. So it's a little bit of both, to be honest, Mike. It's my kind of wherewithal to get over at the times that I need to get over there. But constantly battling against time, because you're aware of people's kind of ages is one particular factor that you have to take in mind, and sort of running out of time. Certainly on Keep, that has proved to be. I mean, we've interviewed many people who have since passed away, unfortunately. But yeah, it's kind of gathering all these pieces, and it involves sometimes a big team of people to do that.
So it's got to be a little schizophrenic for you, because I imagine you're trying to set these interviews up for both movies at the same time so that you can hit multiple people in, say, Los Angeles for Wolfen and for The Keep.
Yeah, in such a way, yeah. I mean, it just so happens that Wolfen was proving to be such a pleasurable experience in the way it got started that The Keep followed suit soon after. And, it's something that's hasn't been tried and tested. I think a lot of people, they can gather their facts and they can write about it online, but it takes someone to really sort of go out there and spend their own money, own time and own money to really kind of gather all these pieces together.
So you've been working on this documentary, or both of these documentaries, for over a decade. You talked about doing some research in 2004, 2005. Do you also run into the issue when it comes to technology changing, and are you having to battle now with formats of different things that you might have shot in the early days versus lately?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've thought about two routes with Michael Wadley's interview. He can either be kind of a narrator in some way, where we might just look at using his audio as a possibility, or he might be on camera in the actual film itself, because technology has changed and formats have changed. Camera, household cameras have changed, and the domestic use of editing. I'm just right now looking in front of a monitor, editing the opening sequence to the documentary for Wolfen. So I'm actually looking at footage that I had shot, 10 years ago.
I've seen the trailer now for the Wolfen documentary, Uncovering Wolfen, and I have to ask, where did you get those amazing shots of the flyovers of New York?
Most of it is actually stock footage,
okay.
but it's very specific. The shot as we come round to Federal Hall is meant to be a POV, as if we were looking from, maybe the last wolf in existence, looking around, and weathered and beaten and defeated by the America that we have today.
And I also have to ask about your poster designs, because they are fantastic. Who did your poster work?
Yes, that was a guy named Jeremy Mintzer. I think he's quite well known in the business, but he had done previously, I think, a poster for a screening of Wolfen here in the UK at the well-known Prince Charles Cinema, which Wadley attended. Actually, he was there. Print of the film, I think, had been carefully stored away for many, many years, so it was in very good condition at the time. And, I think because of the success of Woodstock, Warner Brothers have taken great care with Wolfen over the years. I mean, they've released it, time and time again in widescreen and taken great care in transferring the film. Most recently for Blu-ray, I'm guessing you're aware of the great transfer that came out, I think, in 2015.
Yeah, I'm definitely aware of that, and I'm also aware of the rumors that there was an audio commentary that was omitted from that release.
It may or may not have been recorded. I'm not 100% convinced that it was, but if it was, it may well have been, for all kind of manner of reasons. I mean, Wadley has very specific political points to make, so maybe that didn't sit well with the studio. Was
there anyone that you encountered who was reticent to talk about the film?
No, I don't think so. I think although I feel sorry for him in some ways, is the great editor Richard Chew, who had a very difficult experience on the film. He was very protective of Wadley's vision, and even though it was unfinished at that time, that it had to be presented to the studio executives, he left, or rather he was fired, along with Wadley.
Speaking of editing, are you doing all of your own editing on these as well?
Only on Wolfen. I have that here in the UK. The Keep is over in New York right now. I won't get into the editing of that piece because there's a lot more elements involved, and to edit those two documentaries myself would be very overwhelming. So that is released from my control at the moment. Until we get a rough cut together, which hopefully will be in February. Wolfen will take a lot longer. We're looking at probably maybe a 12-month kind of turnaround to produce a first cut, but that's very much dependent on, again, licensing and gathering the materials to really tell the story.
Do you already have your composer set for that?
Well, I mean, I thought about using Horner Score really as the lyrical kind of piece, center of the piece, really. I mean, it's such an emotional piece of work, and I think even though amazingly you only had 5 or 6 days to record it in, it's quite remarkable how well that works within the frame of the film. So I haven't really thought about music at this very stage. I think the most important thing now is just to get the entire structure onto the timeline, and really kind of look at it and maybe get a fresh pair of eyes on it. Maybe get another editor in to look at it and see what's working, see what's not working, and then I can think about music.
Have you even started to think about distribution for it?
Well, this is a little bit more of an unusual beast. I mean, it's a story where it breaks away from the traditional retrospective way of telling stories into a kind of social cause and real world issues. So, I think it would kind of probably bode well more with, we could look at places like PBS, for example. They could be a good market for it. Wadley expressed interest in maybe the BBC. We have BBC 4 here that shows a lot of arts documentaries. Recently, there was the Decade of Fire documentary that focused specifically on that particular time in the South Bronx. That is kind of really a parallel project to the story I'm trying to tell.
Do you have any concerns? Are you using footage from the movies while you're doing this?
Yeah, I mean, fair use is definitely going to be something we're going to have to follow. The nature of pulling kind of pieces from documentary film, we've seen many other films being made at that particular time, the Fort Apache of the Bronx. But I would say Wolfen is probably the most handsome of the pieces that were made at the time. Clips from the documentary would primarily consist of ways in which we can work in a fair use angle.
I know you're not done with either of these yet, but I am curious, what has been the most difficult thing to put together these two documentaries?
Just the stamina, really. The stamina to be able to keep going and finding new things, really. There is obviously a period when you need to stop, and that period is now, where we really have all the elements to tell the story. I mean, the Wolfen is very much a cautionary tale, really. I mean, we can only be subjective, but on one hand, you know, when a filmmaker has these opportunities and they come to Hollywood, you know, you have to be willing to be flexible. I guess Wadley really wasn't. He didn't have, as I said, the drive like his peers, like Scorsese and Coppola did, to basically continue with it. His reasons for leaving the film business are many and varied, but what remains of Wolfen and what we have is fascinating.
You don't seem to shy away from taking on almost too many things, and I'm curious, are you working on anything else while you're still working on these two documentaries?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to talk about them because they're from pre-existing films, but one of them is a remake, a French movie, but it's based on a British book. That's what I'm working on at the moment. So I'm kind of moving away from documentary, but at the same time, documentary is still a fundamental interest for me. That's where I would like to eventually make a living. Really, the film aspect is really the bigger kind of aspiration. You know, the business has changed so much that in a career, it's very hard to make maybe one film every 3 years.
So the question that's on my mind, and I'm sure it's on the mind of the listeners as well, is where can we keep up on these things? Where can we find out when a World War II fairy tale, The Making of Michael Mann's Keep, or Uncovering Wolfen are going to be out and playing in festivals near them?
I think with the Michael Mann project, that is going to be finished a lot sooner than Wolfen. That already has a lot of exposure online, so you can always keep up to date with it. We've been quiet for many reasons, primarily because we're editing. But with Wolfen, I chose something slightly different in that I didn't really want to really get involved too early on in promoting that online until it's finished. Primarily because there's so much to say, I think, with it. Not to say that diminishes any of the work that we've done on a World War II fairy tale. I mean, that has as many elements as Uncovering Wolfen does, but both documentaries, I wanted to try slightly different approaches to the pieces, and so Wolfen has been very much undercover, no pun intended.
Oh, I think that was very intended.
Even the title itself, I mean, when we look at the movie, Mike, I mean, everything in Wolfen is designed and there for real purpose. I mean, it's a whole world picture. Certainly in terms of design, I mean, as I said, it's about surveillance. And so I was very specific about creating the documentary too. You know, the title itself, Uncovering Wolfen, is a direct nod to Finney's detective in the film, in the way he pieces the case together. One of my particular favourite sequences in the film is obviously the Indian bar sequence, where he's sitting there and listening to the Indians, and we segue beautifully with James Horner's score into Van der Veer's apartment, and he's there almost kind of mumbling in a kind of lyrish kind of way, piecing together the pieces of the cases that he's working on. I mean, there's almost a sense of this kind of lyrical height that it reaches at that particular time in the film.
Well, Stuart Buck, thank you so much for your time today. I'm so glad that we were able to talk about your documentaries, and I can't wait to see them.
I am a hungry
If you enjoy this show and want more people to know about it, head on over to iTunes, leave a comment, and rate it 5 stars. Make sure you like and share us on Facebook, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter. Just search for Christopher Media. Thank you in advance for supporting Christopher Media by clicking on the PayPal button and by clicking through to all the sponsors who support ChristopherMedia.net. Most importantly, we would like to take the time to extend an extra special thanks to you. Christopher Media could not exist without your support. Thank you for visiting ChristopherMedia.net, and thank you for listening. Christopher Media. Let's make some noise.